This happened a few years back. It's one of the most terrifying things that I have ever experienced, and I've been here to post it on here, as each time that I have gone to post it, I haven't been able to articulate the terror that I felt onto the text enough to justify the story. It's 100% true, and I have struggled for years to make sense of how I allowed it to happen, but I did. I was a young 20-something-year-old, and I was working 2 jobs to save up to head to university by the start of the following academic year, September UK that is. This was during the beginning of the year around February. The nights were long, dark, dim and cold, and we often had bad weather, raining, foggy, windy. I was working in a department store in the day and a restaurant/a bar come the evening. I was very tired and overworking, but I was desperately saving. I drove a shitty 5-door Peugeot 206 which had a broken back left passenger door handle. You had to manually lock it, or else it would remain open, though you had used the electric key thing to lock the rest of the car. I had been working around 11 days straight like this, with varying day shifts, but mainly consistent evening shifts bar and work, and waiting tables around 6 PM to 1 AM. I had just finished up at the bar and it was about 1:45 in the morning, and I was locking up and heading to my car. It was dark, desolate and loud. The wind was whirling like crazy and there was that awful rain pouring. I shot to my car, whacked on the heaters and wipers full flow, and headed home with my music blaring. I lived about 25 minutes away, but would often take the route, which meant that I would miss town centre traffic. This was a route through country lanes, and what I hadn't thought about were possible flooding and puddles, etc. that may halt my route. I was tired and just wanted to get home as soon as possible. So I was heading down this country lane when I suddenly became aware of a large dark object spanning across the width of the road. I slowed down so that I could take a good look and process what it was. Another point to note was that in the distance behind me for the majority of this journey was another car. I could make out faintly the headlights of a vehicle. The object in the road was still, spiky and long. A fucking tree branch. Great. The stupid thing was, I didn't even think this was weird. It was so majestically placed, directly across the center of the road, there was no way to pass. I honestly wrote it off in my mind as it had fallen this way. There was nothing around, no houses, buildings, etc. The only other thing that I could see was the faint headlights of the vehicle behind me, but they seemed far away. This was a fairly straight country lane for about 5 to 6 miles. This is where I get a whole new level of stupid. Instead of turning around and heading back out towards the main roads, I wanted to get home so badly, and I knew if I moved it just a little out the road, I could skim past and be home in around 7 to 8 minutes, as opposed to an extra 25 minutes heading back out onto the roads and through the town. So I did. I actually put my hazards on, parked slightly, angled to the left hand side off the road, got out of my car, and headed to the branch. It wasn't a particularly heavy set or big, it was just long and thin, and I headed to the end part, which was on the right hand side, leant over and yanked the branch, pulling and walking backwards, essentially moving the branch back towards the bushes and land and exposing a gap on the left hand side of the road where I would squeeze past. I hope this makes sense. This took probably less than 2 minutes and I rushed as I was getting soaking wet and cold, and I darted back to my car. I should note that as I exited my car initially, I pressed the electric key locking button, but I didn't turn back to look whilst doing this, and I kind of just swung my arm backwards and pressed whilst focusing my attention on the end and start of the branch that I would grab. Also, I shall note that you couldn't hear much. The wind was making that loud wail type noise, and it was fairly low visibility conditions weather-wise. I did notice the headlights of the other vehicle now approaching as I whizzed back to my car and got out of the way. The vehicle had slowed down to around 5 yards away from my car, obviously slowing at the sight of hazard lights I think, and I even remember putting my hand up as if to say sorry, thanks, I'll be out of your way in a sec, as I got to my car. I got back into my car, quickly started the engine and pulled off. Starting the engine meant my already loud music started blaring immediately. Important to note, I couldn't hear anything but the music. I had literally just pulled off when I noticed two large beaming lights in my rearview mirror. I am shitty with these things. I always think someone has either full beams on when they don't, and I'm very sensitive to light, so I always just write off particularly bright lights as my imagination. I pops the button on my rearview mirror to do that reflection off your window screen thing and dim the lights a bit. As I do this, I faintly remember seeing something move in the switchover, like a dark object disappearing from my view quickly. I write this off also. I notice these headlights behind me are flashing and are ridiculously close to my car. This person was tailing me and flashing the fuck out their lights and doing that flashing thing like they were going to overtake, but dip back behind you trying to get you to pull over. I start getting pissed off as I'm thinking, what the fuck, just overtake me already. I faintly start hearing the sound of a horn honking and think, okay, maybe there's something wrong with my car. It could even be the police. I had better pull over, but I'll remain in my locked car. I indicate to pull over on the left hand side, and this car pulls up immediately behind me. Before I could even turn my engine off or get to a halt at the side of the road, my back left passenger door swings open. A real life person dives out of my car, rolls onto the grass on the left hand side of the road, and runs into the forest type area next to us. A person, an actual real person, has just been sat or crouched or whatever the fuck they were doing in my back seats, whilst I just headed home, music blaring, tired, eyes and ears completely oblivious. Please, believe me when I say I know. I know how unbelievable this seems. How did I not feel someone was there? How would I not smell them, hear them breathing? I ask myself these very questions every time I think of or refer to this story, but I had no idea they were there. Before I can even comprehend what was just happening, a large man arrives at my window banging and shouting something that I could not at the time understand. I swear to God, I just sat there for about 10 seconds staring behind me at the still open door, mouth wide open, before I even turned to face this person banging my window. And then I turn to face him and I see the panic and worry in his face. I will never forget his face. He looks like a terrified father. I don't know how to explain it, but he just had this protective male stance and worried face. And then I just scream. I screamed for about 15 seconds as I felt tears streaming down my face. He bangs again on the window and I manage to press the unlock button inside the car. He swings the door open and leans in shouting, "Oh my fucking God, are you okay? Are you okay?" repeatedly as I just sit there crying. He eventually manages to calm me down to a point that I can speak comprehensible words, and I just mutter, "What the fuck?" over and over. He eventually explains to me that as he was slowing down, approaching my car and hazards, he watched a figure, all in black, dart from out of the forest type area on the left of my car, enter my car through the fucking broken unlocked back left passenger door just as I was heading back towards my car, whilst checking out the gap that I had created by moving the branch, paying no attention to my car. Before he had a chance to make sense of what he saw and alerts me, I'm driving off through the gap and he immediately starts flashing his beams and doing the swerve thing and manages to get me to pull over. He sees the same figure dive out of my car, roll onto the grass and get up and dart back into the forest area. After about 10 minutes of back and forward heated conversation, I call 999 and report the incident. The police arrive and take a statement off both of us and call for backup to search the wooded area straight away. Me and this guy are told to head straight home, which we did. He follows my car closely until he turns off at the end of the lane. I still have his contact details now, and I'm very thankful to him. The police never made any arrest or anything, and I never heard much back from them as technically nothing had happened to me, and they didn't find him that night. I don't know what this person had planned, whether he was just trying to catch a lift or what, but it still haunts me. It haunts me that I could also be so unaware and in so much potential danger without even realizing it. No sixth sense, no gut feeling like people describe. It was pure shock. I even remember hearing the back left door open and just not even comprehending it. It made literally no sense. Through conversation with the guy who alerted me, we concluded that whoever the person was who got into my car had placed a branch in the road in the hope that someone would pull over, get out, and move it, leaving them enough time to sneak in undetected with God knows what intentions. Exactly what I did. Stupid, irresponsible me. This experience damaged me to the point that I can't drive alone at night anymore, even with a new car where all the doors are locked, even with no wind or rain. I cannot and will not do it. This means my partner has to drive me to and from work every day. I have to time my returns from outings so that I am not left to drive alone at night. I know it seems extreme, but the shock of it all has never left me. I almost don't trust myself. For the context of this story, I was a 17-18-year-old Australian male at the time it took place. And without further ado, here is my creepy experience. This occurred a few years ago when I was 17 or 18. It was late at night, sometime around midnight, and me being the nocturnal person that I was and still am, I decided to take my dog for a walk. Now, it's important that I describe the landscape of my neighborhood for this story to make sense. I live on a very busy street that connects to a main road that leads in and out of the city. Near my street is an adjacent neighborhood. This neighborhood has a giant park in its center with around 10 small side streets that all lead to dead ends and one exit that connects it to my street. As this is a relatively small neighborhood, it received very little government funding, and as such, there were either no streetlights or dimly lit lights scarcely scattered throughout the small side streets. After exploring the park for half an hour, my dog, being the lazy staffy that she is, decided that she wanted to go home. So we walked up one of the small side streets to try and cut back to my neighborhood. While the street was a dead end, I knew there was a small path that cut between two houses that led back to my street. I knew this because my friend and I used to play basketball at the park as kids and would always cut back and forth between this relatively unknown shortcut with no problem. Apart from being a little overgrown with tall grass on either side, we had gone through this street hundreds of times since our early teens. However, this night, something was different. It had been years since I had last been down this street, and something seemed off. After walking for a minute or so, I reached the end of the path where the two houses lay. As there was no lighting from the moon, and of course the street light was broken, it was extremely hard to see anything. However, the last house on the right quickly caught my attention. As it was midnight, everyone was asleep and there was no lights on in any of the houses, which is why this house instantly stood out. Now, I don't scare easily, being a 6'1" male with a muscular physique and having that cocky ignorance of being invincible that comes with youth. But this house gave me the chills, to the point where I started shivering despite it being summer in Australia. The house was completely illuminated in a dark red, and I don't mean that it had red paint on the outside or someone had a red lava lamp on. I mean, the entire inside of the house was illuminated in a shade of blood red. All of the curtains were drawn back, giving me a clear look of the interior of the house, and every room was the same color, that sinister shade of dark red. Now, this alone was a cause for concern, but this isn't what bothered me. Initially, I was intrigued by the coloring of this house and naturally started looking for the source of the lighting, but that's where things got even more bizarre. The more I gazed into the house, the more peculiar it became. I approached the house further to see if they had some form of red light bulbs or a torch, but could see that there was no light radiating from any of the bulbs in the house, and there was no distinguishable direction of the light. It was at this point that I noticed that none of the lights in the house were on, Yet, I could make out every detail due to this dark shade of red. It was at this point that I started getting that feeling that you get when someone is watching you. A cold shiver went down my spine, and it finally hit me. The reason this house was bothering me so much wasn't the color of the lighting, it was the consistency of it. When you turn on a lamp or one of the lights on in the ceiling of a house, you can clearly see the light source and where it starts. From there, the light gets dimmer the further you move away from the source. But with this house, there was no origin of the light, and what really got to me was that the entire house, every room, from floor to ceiling and from corner to corner, was illuminated in the exact same capacity. And it was at this point that it appeared to be more like looking into a fish tank filled with red liquid, as opposed to a house with red lights. The entire house looked like it was filled from top to bottom in this blood-like liquid, and after a few minutes of staring blindly into the house, my dog is a complete sweetheart and never growls, but at this point, she was giving out this sinister growl with saliva flowing from her mouth and all of her canines showing. As ridiculous as it sounds, I was actually relieved at first to notice that I wasn't the only one who was getting freaked out by how bizarre this house was. But that's when it hit me. As I looked down at my dog, trying to reassure her, I noticed that she wasn't facing in the same direction. She was facing the opposing house, the house on the left. This confused me more than anything. In this dimly lit street, we were standing directly in front of this blood-stained house that appeared to be filled with red liquid in a way that can only be described as completely unnatural, and my dog is growling at the house opposite it. Shaking my head, I went to pull her forward so we could get the hell out of this neighborhood, but she was completely frozen, still growling. As I went towards her to try and convince her to follow me, I stared into the house she was growling at, and that's when my heart went ice cold. All the houses, apart from the blood house, were dark, but this house was pitch black. I couldn't even see the outline of the house, and if I hadn't been past this street before, I wouldn't even have known anything was there. And it was at this point in time that my feeling of someone watching me skyrocketed, and I began to feel sick in the pits of my stomach. Stuck between this house that looked like the elevator from The Shining with blood gushing from the ceiling to the floor, and this pitch black house that stood out as dark in a neighborhood with zero lighting, I felt helpless. My dog had shifted from growling to barking at this point, but was completely stiff, and as I desperately tried to pull her leash, I could literally hear her claws scratching against the surface of the road. Fearing that I was about to be ambushed by serial killers or some paranormal crap, I was about to go down with the bloodhouse, and I decided to utilize my flight response. In an attempt to get the fuck out of there, I picked up my dog and proceeded to run down the small path to cut back to my street. Not wanting to fall into the horror cliches of looking back only to trip or to be attacked by the killer, I proceeded to run forward without glancing behind me. But it was at this point that I heard two male voices yelling above the sounds of my loud footsteps. As my fears of an ambush were justified at this point, I continued to sprint home. But the thing was that these voices were coming from behind the fences of the blood house that ran adjacent to the footpath, and not from the dark house that my dog was obsessively barking at. While this made the event even more confusing and frightening, I proceeded to continue sprinting until I got to my house, quickly checking to see if I was being followed. Upon getting inside, I slammed the door and collapsed to the floor, breathing heavily. This woke my mother up, who asked me what was wrong. I told her nothing, and that I had just been for a run and forgot what time it was, to which she brushed it off. But she still remembers that night to this day, claiming that there was something off about me that night whenever she brings it up. Unfortunately, as she remembers this, I can't just think back to this being a very vivid, fucked up dream, both in the day and during the night, without anything even remotely unordinary happening since. But that night still haunts me to this day, and it has left me with so many unanswered questions. Why was the house completely illuminated in blood red? How was it so vividly lit up without any lights being on? Why was the entire house illuminated at exactly the same capacity to the point where it looks like a fishbowl filled to the brim with blood. How did that opposing house become so dark that it was impossible to see so much as the house's outline? Why was my dog barking at that house and unconcerned with the blood house, which stood out like a sore thumb? And probably the most startling question that replays in the back of my mind almost daily. If there were two men waiting to ambush me at the blood house, what was my dog so petrified of that she ignored them to shift her attention to the dark house? Sometimes, it's just easier to just not question things.